بتسريبات الجزيرة.
Erakat's initial reaction was to deny the paper's authenticity and call it a smear campaign led by a media outlet he said was hostile to the Palestinian Authority, AlJazeera.
What was significant and very pertinent about their response was the fact that they tried to focus on AlJazeera and its Director General.
أغلق على حاله الباب مع وضح خنفر.
And also the ruler of Qatar. In a sense, they personalize the entire issue and they try to evade what was really at stake.
Many of the stock charges that are thrown against Al Jazeera quickly resurfaced in the Palestine papers, that somehow we were being used as a tool of Hamas, Iran, or even Qatari foreign policy. All of them are false and libelous.
But the ultimate question remains, are the papers authentic? Yes, they are. Nobody has to rely on Al Jazeera's analysis or anything else. All those papers, all 1,600 documents, are right there on the transparency.aljazeera.net website.
Eventually, Erakat acknowledged not only that the documents were authentic, but they were leaked by someone in his own office. He maintained Al Jazeera reported some of the papers out of context, but accepted responsibility for the leak and resigned. Before he did that, though, some PA supporters attacked an Al Jazeera studio in Nablus on the West Bank and tried to break into this building, the network's bureau in Ramallah.
As an institution, Al Jazeera was attacked. Our bureau in Ramallah was approached by a mob of individuals who beat down our door, spray painted our walls with graffiti, and as the New York Times reported, many in the crowd were undercover preventative security service individuals in keeping with the most authoritarian traditions of the Arab Middle East.
It was not terribly surprising to me to see the Palestinian Authority, and I think the Fatah movement also mobilizing vandals to go and attack the Al Jazeera office. Palestinian Authority's response often to media reports that damage its credibility is simply to shoot the messengers and arrest journalists, and that is really part of this huge democracy gap and transparency gap that the Palestine Papers leak is addressing.
Somewhat overshadowed by the reaction on the Palestinian side of the story and the Fatah-Hamas split was the coverage on the other side of the Palestine-Israel divide.
The Israeli media were very excited about the story and very interested because for them it was a chance to see into the inner workings of the peace process, to see what their own politicians were saying. And I think, you know, by and large, they took it very seriously.
You had Haaretz representing the left-leaning intellectuals of Israel saying that it provided the very sensitive inside baseball, if you will, to the negotiations over the past decade. And for other, you know, conservative right-wing papers like Jerusalem Post, they use it as a validation that negotiators like Sivi Livni did not concede at all on principle and gave their politicians a attaboy or an attagirl for being very rigid with the Palestinians in the way they handled the negotiations.
The release of the Palestine Papers put the PA in an uncomfortable position and ultimately resulted in the demise of its chief negotiator. There is an argument being made, however, in the media market that might matter most in America, that lifting the veil that shrouded the peace talks may have actually helped the Palestinian cause.
They revealed that the Palestinians were more willing to offer concessions than previously was known. It's actually in the U.S. been something that has boosted, I think, the public image of the Palestinians for flexibility when they've often been portrayed as intransigent and unwilling to reach any kind of peace deal with Israel.
The Palestine Papers, the story that brought transparency to the process, put the players on the record, and the media in the spotlight. Our Global Village voices now on the fallout from the Palestine Papers.
The Palestine Papers may have sent shockwaves around the world, but they surprised few Palestinians. If anything, it was not the substance that was eye-opening, it was what the content revealed about the process, how autocratic it was, how out of touch it was, how colonial it was, and how illegitimate it was.
And it's interesting that the Palestinian media focused on Al Jazeera as much as it focused on the content itself of the Palestine papers. And it's unfortunate that the resignation of Saeb Erekat came as a result of the media frenzy that it caused, rather than the content itself of the Palestine papers.
The transparency unit, in my opinion, is very, very important. It is kind of a regional WikiLeaks without any bias and with great deal of objectivity. I think it will benefit the Arab people everywhere.
Time now for Listening Post News Bites. If you want to know what the authorities are thinking in Myanmar, just read the state-run newspapers. They'll tell you. And the signs are not good for the country's best-known pro-democracy campaigner. Aung San Suu Kyi spent 15 of the past 21 years under house arrest until her release in November last year, 6 days after the general elections. The state-run newspaper, The New Light of Myanmar, now says that Ms. Suu Kyi and her political party would, quote, meet their tragic end, unquote, if they continued to endorse Western sanctions against Myanmar. U.S. State Department spokesman P.J. Crowley referred to the country by its former name when he said Burma claims there is a new era, but it is up to its old tricks by threatening Aung San Suu Kyi. New suits does not a new system make, referring to the newly elected government. A host for the Saudi-owned satellite news channel Al Arabiya has been reportedly fired after he criticized on air the kingdom's media for their coverage of the protests in Egypt. Hafiz Mirazi, the former bureau chief for AlJazeera in Washington, D.C., first took aim at Saudi Arabia's state-run newspapers on his talk show, Studio Cairo. He asked if they would ever dare to criticize the king or the Saudi government. He then turned his attention to his own channel and said that unless he was allowed to talk about how the revolution in Egypt could affect Saudi Arabia in his next broadcast, he would leave the channel. Mr. Mirazi was reportedly fired the next day. A prominent Mexican journalist has been taken off the air there after saying on live radio that President Felipe Calderon should respond to allegations that he has a drinking problem. Carmen Aristegui hosted a daily morning talk show on MVS Radio. The topic came up when members of the opposition party unveiled a banner in the Mexican Congress that said, "Would you let a drunkard drive your car? No, right? Then why would you let one run the country?" On her show, she asked the president to respond to the question and said that Mexicans deserved an answer. She said, quote, "This is not the first time that the subject of alcoholism of Felipe Calderon has been spoken of," unquote. Aristegui has a reputation as a hard-working and fair-minded journalist, but her bosses fired her, they said, for broadcasting rumors as news. Now here's a story about someone going after WikiLeaks, writing emails about their clever plan, and then being undone when those emails were leaked. It has to do with the Bank of America, which is rumored to be the subject of an upcoming WikiLeaks documents release. A U.S. security company called H.B. Gary came up with a plan to post some fake documents on WikiLeaks, then expose them as fakes in order to discredit the site. It pitched that idea to one of the Bank of America's law firms. H.B. Gary hooked up with a tech company called Palantir Technologies. And there's a revealing trail of emails between the two, one of which suggests that journalists like Glenn Greenwald of Salon.com needed to be attacked, and that without the support of people like Greenwald, WikiLeaks would fold. The emails were obtained by Anonymous, the online militants who first came to WikiLeaks' defense when Amazon, MasterCard, and other firms cut their ties with the organization.